My aim and intention is to assist you and facilitate and coach you to become the most ferocious learner you can become as of today, and growing increasingly in the days and the weeks to come. Ferocious learning is having that attitude of there's so much more that I can learn and enrich my mind and texture my understandings with the ability to experience the world, represent the world, encode the world, retrieve my information, mix it together, create new things. And of course, with the pace of information and learning in our culture today, just staying up with our own particular fields is a challenge in and of itself. For those of you who are in the teaching profession, as if the rest of us aren't, we will be talking about how to apply NLP and metastates and neurosemantics to other people who want to improve, run their own brain, and become much more effective in their own learning styles. We will get to that. My presupposition is that when I know how to run my own brain and really can adjust it, fine-tune it, move it around, and I experience some other people's brains and help them and coach them, because we're going to get into groups and we're going to facilitate each other in that way, then it's easy for me to teach someone else, because I really understand how this mechanism works. And that's what NLP is all about, running your own brain. Metastates is all about running the higher levels of the brain and setting frames of references that support the lower states of consciousness. So that's where we're going to go today with regard to learning. And the manual before you has about 90 pages. We're going to cover 5 of them if at the most. So we're not going to cover very much in the manual. The manual is provided for strategies for learning and just lots of other things. This is our first accelerated learning project that we've put together. We've never presented this, so just like Sam was Bob's guinea pig, we are practicing and playing with this today. So we're going to customize it to what you want. So we'll go in several different directions, and so feel free just to jump in and say, what about this, what about that, how do we apply it here? We're going to start with state. We're going to look at frames and metastates, and then from there it's just really wide open as to where we can go. For those of you who have experience in NLP, you know that NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, is about the programs I have in my head and my neurology that enable me to encounter the world, experience the world, represent the world, language the world, that then allows me to start utilizing my brain and my neurology, and that's why it's neuro-linguistic. It's a combination of both. And it's not, learning is not just in the brain, but obviously in the muscles too. And so NLP is about how to run your own brain. And that's the discipline of that. How many people have a good familiarity with the NLP model? Good familiarity with it. We will let you people be the ones who go first in the work in the little laboratories. When we get into groups, we want you to go first because you know what you're doing. And you get to play with these other people. Who doesn't know anything about NLP? So we got some NLP virgins. Raw meat for the workshops. NLP is what you've been doing all your life because it's neuro-linguistic processing of information and encoding of information. It's just how our brains work, and we'll go through a little model of that here in a moment. Metastates takes it the next step by looking at how that we layer thoughts and feelings upon thoughts and feelings upon thoughts and feelings, and we embed consciousness inside of consciousness. In fact, that's most of our problem. And so Fritz Perls said we sometimes need to lose our mind and come to our senses. And losing the mind and coming to the senses is the foundation for learning. Is it not? If you're not here in the moment, if you're not seeing and hearing and feeling and smelling and tasting and encountering the actual see, hear, feel, empirical, sensory-based world, so we lose our mind and come to our senses because some people's got some minds that have been layered so that they're afraid of learning. And if you have that mind, it's going to shut down the senses. If you're afraid of not learning fast enough because it means you might be stupid, consider that mind and its effect upon neurology. And so sometimes we have to lose that mind to come to our senses so that we can then rebuild some new mind concepts that's going to support and enable us. And that's what metastates is. A metastate is a state that supports other states. And so we're going to look at those frames of mind and those references. On page 5, just to kind of orient us as we move on, well, page 4 actually, at the bottom of page 4, if you don't know how your mind works, how are you ever going to obtain the skills, the high-level skills of a learning expert? And so once we learn how to run our own brain and how the brain works, then we can become an expert in learning, in ferocious learning, and empowered learning. At the bottom of page 5, about learning, what do we mean by learning anyway? Well, by learning we inform and order consciousness, so it's this forming and ordering of consciousness that's what we mean by learning. Does anybody have a semantic reaction to the term learning? That when you hear the word, I've got to learn something, I've got to study something, you have a semantic reaction, I'd rather not? Or is everybody pretty turned on by the very word? The word, in fact, is a turn on. Well, that'd be my guess, that you wouldn't be here today if it wasn't a real turn on. Do you know anybody who, when you say the word learning, you can get all kinds of reactions going? Well, a semantic reaction is a meta-level frame of mind or a meta-state about the experience because they have framed the experience itself somehow as negative, painful, distressful. Somehow they've programmed it to have those kinds of meanings. So what we mean by learning is to form or inform our insides, and so it's a programming task. And so in the second paragraph there, we learn to perform these programming tasks. We form our emotions, our habits, our patterns, and we construct our sense of reality. This means that we've learned to learn the way we've learned. So one of the first questions that we begin with this morning is, what have you learned about learning that enables you to be an excited learner, a delightful learner, a learner who enjoys learning? What do you know about learning that turns you on? Because you must have learned something about learning that excites you. So just scan through what comes to mind, what comes to your awareness, what emotion, what memory. What do you know about learning that makes it so delightful for you?
It's potentially profitable.
Potentially profitable. Now there's a frame of reference. Ooh, what if I thought that about this experience? It's potentially profitable.
Confidence builder.
It builds confidence. It's a confidence builder. Now there's a frame of reference. It builds confidence. And builds confidence specifically in any particular area?
Doesn't matter. Depends on what you're learning. Whether it's business related, whether it's health related, whether it's even related to learning.
Okay, so it's just kind of a general sense of confidence, greater trust in my own skills to encounter reality and learn from it and move through it. So that just chases away all kinds of fears because it builds confidence. So there's something to learn about learning. Who else has something?
It opens up the world to you. You get to know all kinds of things that make life more interesting.
Okay, so it opens up the world to you and it makes life more interesting. So these are the kinds of things that excite us and that set some frames of references, the very things that some people don't have in their neurolinguistics that they need to have if they're going to become more ferocious. What else?
It's personally fulfilling.
Personally fulfilling. How does it personally fulfill?
Well, especially as a child, it was something I could do that other kids couldn't do when I couldn't do things they could.
Okay, so here's an area of expertise. I can do this. And so it is fulfilling in the sense of it helps us to have a sense of actualizing our skills, our abilities to map and pattern the world and then to be able to navigate through. Which is what learning is about. Learning is about mapping. Making maps so that I can navigate new territories. If I opened up the hood of a car, since I haven't learned that field, I would learn there, look in there, feel pretty stupid, and not have a clue as the first navigational act to do. Because I don't know that field. But if I learned it, then I would know how to navigate and to do things. So learning enables us to have confidence in our skills and our abilities to move through things. And when I know that about learning, then it becomes a turn-on. What else have you learned about learning?
Gives you freedom of choice. Without anything.
So freedom of choice. So it expands freedom of choice, more choice. So the lack of learning means I'm more of a prisoner and have the dilemma of I don't have that choice. I can't go there. Okay.
The ultimate source of power.
The ultimate sense of power. I like that one.
Source of power.
Source of power. So
The
here's
more you know, the more you can control.
the more I know, the more I can. Now these are frames that I think would enable some people to get turned on to learning. The ultimate sense of power, the source of ultimate source of power, and the more I know, the more I can do, and the more I can control. Annette?
There's a deep dichotomy between learning and application that unless you're willing to go the extra 20 miles to apply, the learning becomes useless and frustrating.
So you've learned this about learning. So tell me how this turns you on to learning. Because that's our overall frame at this moment. How does that turn you on to learning when you think those thoughts?
Well, it turns me on in that I try to sort as the things come at me for what's practical to apply and what's not.
Okay. So what if we set that frame of mind in our heads that learning is practical when I implement? When I implement, it becomes practical, because for how many people learning is academic? Learning is in the head. Learning is just becoming an egghead. Learning means now you can't do stuff.
I would even add a challenge to hers. I would say you haven't really learned something if you can't or are not willing to apply.
Okay. So part of what we're doing now is looking at how we think about learning, how we define learning, what our mental programs for learning is. Learning is doing. And there is that false dichotomy when I separate, well, I know it, but I can't do it, but I know it. Which we should say, then you don't know it. I can read a book on typing and know where the keys are, but if my fingers don't know, then I really haven't learned typing. I don't know how to do the keyboard. So learning is implementation. Learning is the ability to take effective action in the world, and it gives us this power. What have you learned about your learning style? What have you learned about how to learn? Not only the value of learning, but what have you learned about how to learn?
I've got a problem with the previous thing.
Okay.
You can read about painting, you can read about music. That doesn't necessarily make you an artist where you can paint,
Okay.
nor can you play a musical instrument, but it enhances your appreciation of both of those.
Okay. So some of the things that we may want to do with our learning is have appreciation. So there may be some but that's an action once again. The ability to feel appreciation for something I may not be able to reproduce. So there are some distinctions there. Sometimes we go to fields just to appreciate the field, to appreciate the expertise that we find in other people, even though we're not becoming a craftsman, a clinician, an expert in that field ourselves. We just want to expand our understanding of here's another field, and here's some of the facts of how it works. The question about what have you learned about how to learn? You've come to Accelerated Learning workshop this morning, and in just a moment we're going to talk about the states that we're in. Have you put yourself into a most ferocious learning state as you walked in this room?
We think that's your job.
No, okay.
Get him, Ben.
That's what you paid for.
Get him, Ben.
So,
I think the most important thing that I can come up with about how to learn is when you go looking for knowledge, have a goal in mind.
okay. So here's one thing that you may have learned about learning. My guess is you've all learned that. When I sit down with a book, when I sit into a workshop, when I encounter somebody that I'm going to gain information from that person with, or I play an experiment with some activity, I have a goal in mind as to what I'm going to accomplish. So that may be one thing you've learned about learning. I think that would accelerate learning. I know when I open up a book and, wonder what's this about? And I really have no goal. I can read, and the learning's not going to be much accelerated. And it'll be easy to not remember, to not use, because I have no goal. Just, I don't know what this is about. So that would be kind of lazy reading, undirected, unfocused, undirectionalized reading, but goal-oriented. So that's one thing to learn about learning. What else have you learned about your own learning skills, strategies, processes for how to put yourself into the most ferocious, passionate, effective, accelerated learning state that you know how to put yourself into?
I've learned that I'm a visual learner and a hands-on and an auditory. Right now, that's not my best state. Once we
Okay.
get into groups and actually do that, that's going to be where I'm going to do my learning.
Okay. So knowing which modalities that are really, really effective, the visual, or the kinesthetic, or the auditory, or how best we learn, and putting ourselves into that kind of a process, knowing our learning style. Everybody know your learning style, what you do best at, and know how to play to your strengths, and how to overlap from your strengths to your weaknesses. Well, we're going to talk about modalities of learning. We're going to talk about Howard Gardner's 7 intelligences and those strengths that we can play to overlap to our less strong modalities. So knowing that is going to be really key. What else have you learned about your learning?
I'm very global, very big picture.
Okay.
I really get bogged down with a lot of details. If I sort of know what we're going after, I can go back and get the details.
So some of us need to get the big picture at first, and some of us need all the details. Some of us move up and down with a lot of flexibility. It doesn't make that much difference. How many people are global in the way you think, so that before you begin a learning project, you kind of need to have a general sense of what is this about, what am I going to get from it, how am I going to approach it, so that when you open up a book, first of all, you want to just kind of get the overview. How many people are more detailed? You just zoom right in there to get the specifics. And that's what really makes... So some of us are inductive thinkers and some of us are deductive thinkers. We move from the specifics up to the general principles, and we have to create the principles themselves. If someone just gives us the principle, others need the principle and then they can deduce down to specifics. Some people don't do induction or deduction well, they do abduction. What is this like? And so they go over to the side laterally, and they're abductors, and they want to know, kind of metaphorically, what is that like? And they think in that way, which is a really different way from inductive, deductive. Inductive is scientific thinking, deductive is philosophical thinking, abductive is metaphorical thinking. So knowing our style. And we will be talking about those things. Of course, when it comes to communication and helping another person, knowing what style we're up against. I bring my deductive style to your inductive style, and what's wrong with you? Because can't you get the big picture? Well, not yet. Give me some detail. Then I can induce that. So being able to match styles. What kind of a learning state are you in right now? As you start accessing the kind of state that you're in, let's start here. There's a picture in your workbook a few pages over of a state on page 13. Let's just start with a state. A state is a state of mind and a state of body. In NLP, we like to say that these are two royal roads to state. So to get into a state, there's a state of mind and a state of body. So what is the state that you're in? My guess is you're in somewhat of a learning state. How much of a learning state are you in? Let's gauge it from 0 to 10 on a scale. If 10 is you're absolutely have accelerated into a ferocious state, and you couldn't be more open and receptive and alert. You just couldn't be more. You're there. And 0 is no way in hell could you learn anything. Where are you on the scale? So gauge yourself a number. Are you 5? How many 5s or 6s around the middles? How many 7s? Anybody reel up? 7, 8, 9? Some people are already there, just ready to go. Who's under 5? Nobody's under 5? I like gauging states. Yeah.
Just an interesting thought. Probably the people that know you and have read your work and have heard you speak before, probably up around 8, 9, or 10. The people that are sort of sitting back and judging you now are sort of 4 or 5 or 6.
So we first start by gauging, and gauging enables us to kind of register how much of... What do you need to do? What have you learned about your own learning style to turn that up? Now we get to our own specific processes and strategies.
I'm going to sit up straight.
Set up straighter. So we may need to start coaching our body. If you were to put your body right now, your physique, your posture, your breathing, your eyes, if you were to take all of your physiology and put it in the most resourceful learning state possible, move it around to where you're at your best in terms of learning. How are you going to shift your breathing? Just do it now for a moment. Just notice your... Because we all have different styles. Learning by its definition means an alertness to the outside. It may be a book, it may be a person, it may be an environment, it may be an activity, but seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling on the outside. So somewhat of an uptime state when senses are alert. It also has a sense of relaxation. So there's a lot of things in the back of the mind. I got to do this, I got to do that, and the cell phone ringing and everything else. And if there's a lot of distractions, it's hard to be focused. So part of learning is relaxed alertness. So you may need to relax, you may need to shake out tension, stresses, you may need to make some mental adjustments. I'll get to that later. You may need, one of the things about brains do thought balls and thought balling all the time, just little thought balls bounce in, and sometimes we just pay so much attention to these thought balls. and so the thought balls are going to occur. The worst thing is making them go away, because then that pressure makes them have more energy, and then they pop in even more. So if you just welcome them in the stream of consciousness, and just welcome, and then make whatever adjustments you make so that, oh, I'll get to that later. That's okay, I'll get to that later. I'll write myself a note, I'll remember it. So it's part of alertness and it's part of calmness. So notice what you need to do with your body in order to put your physiology, your breathing, your muscle tension in the most ferocious, intense, relaxed kind of state.
You know, I can see where you need to be peaceful, etc. However, I think that my most cogent times of learning have been when I've had a deadline I had to meet.
Okay.
And I had to have something
So you need more
accomplished.
tension.
I had to be accomplished by a certain deadline. And then I've really learned how to get things done or make something happen that I hadn't done before.
Who is the author who said a mind is never more focused when in a fortnight he knows he's going to be hung? It does focus the mind for that deadline.
What you want for breakfast?
What do you want for breakfast? So some of us may need more tension and more pressure. Obviously, if you're so relaxed, so there's going to be an optimum balance between relaxation and alertness. What do you need to do auditorily to say to yourself to be in the most resourceful learning state? Now, some of you may use words, I wonder what I can get from this. Or you may just be tracking over whatever's said, just tracking over and repeating it and listening to it in your own head, in your own voice, or encoding it in someone else's voice. Or some of it, go ahead.
I put the voices in my head in the kindergarten when I walked in here. I don't know what you're going to present, but I've taken my time and I'm going to see and get everything I can out of this.
Okay.
Then I can choose to make up my mind later.
Okay,
So
good.
I don't need any distraction.
Okay, so there's an excellent auditory line expression that coaches us, that induces us, that elicits from us, I don't know what I'm getting, but I'm just going to receive it all, I'll judge it later. One of the things about accelerated learning, we accelerate our learning when we are in the receptive openness state, and we'll judge it later. If I'm judging it when it's coming in, I'm in two states of mind that are contradictory, so that judgment in my mind will turn off my learning or reduce my learning. So the more judgmental I am about anything. But once I have that adjustment inside, I'll judge it later. I'll filter through, accept what I want, throw out the rest. I'll do that judgment process later. If I try to do it while it's coming in, then I don't give it a chance. Have you ever read something that's really difficult and it was struggling? It may be in a field that's just outside of your field of expertise, and you read it and you don't understand it, and then here comes the judgment thought balls. Well, now you just distracted consciousness. You've got one consciousness here and another one here about this. Why couldn't this guy write simpler, easier, more? I must be stupid. What's wrong? I'll never get this. And then we got this line of judgment about what we're reading, and we just reduced in half, at least, our ability to receive whatever. One of the great books that a lot of people are amazed at and never get through is Science and Sanity by Alfred Korzybski in 1933. Because a lot of math, a lot of calculus, a lot of neurology, and a lot of processes there that are very difficult ones. Well, I remember the first time reading this and reading it, and in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, I'll never get this. This is beyond me. And I immediately decided I'm not going to listen to that. And I, as I went through this, still not getting much more out of it, but saying, I'll get it. It'll come together. I might have to read it a second time, third time, fourth time. I've actually read it 5 times now. But I'll get it. I'll get it. And I'm getting it. I've had to go read some calculus books to kind of catch up with it. But I'll get it. But it's judgment that really turns off our ability to learn. And so even those of us who are pretty ferocious in our learning, we still have to handle thoughts of judging, especially if we hear something we disagree with. I disagree with that. It is so easy then to just stop learning, and the blocks come up, and then I can't receive anything more. So making whatever adjustments you need to make, whether it's tough information or it's too fast, too quick, it seems to me the ability to do exactly what Bryce was talking about. I'll just be in kindergarten. And I'll just open and play with it, and later on I'll judge it. Judgment day will come, but not today. So that seems to me to be a key part in the strategy for being open.
Well, you know, what's come to me when you're doing this is just the way you're finding places where I've already used this information with my students in class to get them in the mood to learn. To sit up and sit straight, could they relax, and I start music in the classroom and things like that, so the kids could already be in that state before they ever start. So I've been looking for, hey, what have I been doing already that you just put some really nice words to.
So we've got a couple frames here. One is, once again, the goal, a goal in mind. To read without a goal, to study without a goal, to experience and go play with anything without a goal, seems to me to be just sabotaging our own learning strategies. So the why question. One of the things we'll get to a little bit later is if you've got a big enough why, then consciousness can get real focused, laser beam focused, and when consciousness gets laser beam focused and screens out the rest of the world, then the impression of that information upon us makes such a strong impression. It would be almost impossible to forget because it is impressed so well because we're so focused. So reading with goal in mind is going to be real important. Also, reading with application in mind. Where could I use this? It was Aristotle, 3,000 years ago, who said that which is expressed is impressed. So when we think, who can I tell this about? How can I use this? What's the first thing I can do with this information? When we are in that application mode, so there's the reception. How can I use this? Who can I tell? How can I express it? What can I do with it? It activates us to integrate it and to personalize it, because we're making it personal. So the application thing. So goal in mind and application. These are things that crank up our learning strategy and styles. What else do you do?
I think you said it when you said when you're reading something as a teacher, as most of us are, we're always looking, how can I read this and then teach it? You're almost going at another level, like how can I get into another, how can I then present this? And that's what we're all trying to do. It's not just understanding,
but that implementation.
But pass it on.
So here's really a dynamic thing. Steve Covey stuck this thing in his book, 7 Habits. Go out and teach this thing. As soon as you read this chapter, go teach it somebody, because then that'll really get inside. So there's a principle that when I learn anything, if I've got my mind future pacing this, where tomorrow, where the next day, where the next few months am I going to be used? It's like typing. It's like some of the stories about some of the Vietnam vets who were locked up in the hospitals in casts and things, reading a typing book and not being able to type, but just noticing, oh, there's this key and there's that one, here's the A and here's the X. And they were running the neural circuits without actually typing. When they got out of the cast, they found that they could do it, were typing 40, 50 words a minute. It was running the neural pathways already because it was so vivid. So vividness of application. So I imagine myself teaching this. It's like it's informing the neurology, the voice, the movement, and incorporating it, installing it, implementing it. And for those of us who want to accelerate our learning, so I don't have to read this 5 times, but I read it and I'm already informing, programming my neurology to get it and to act on it, then personalizing it. And so there's one of those meta states that supports our learning state. How can I personalize this? How can I make this mine? The next 2 days we're going to do wealth building. And one of the books I just read last week was The Millionaire Mind by Stanley Thomas, the new book that's just out. And of course, reading through there, the question in my mind, the frame of reference, the filter I had for every page is, am I thinking like a millionaire to the extent that these people are? And what other shifts in consciousness do I need to make so that I'm thinking this way? So there's that application. So check your state. How much do you have the learning state now?
May I back up just a second?
Okay.
You're talking about not placing judgment on what you're reading until you're finished with it. Now, does that mean, there are a lot of teachers here, does that mean that when they're working with their students, they have them to read it and then go back and do the critical thinking?
I would think so.
Yeah, but while they're reading it the first time, it's better not to do that.
Right.
Because that almost goes, for years they've been trained, well, read, and even in college, when I was in college, the professors taught you, well, read it critically. And, as you
The
read
first
it.
time.
Yeah.
There's a statement in the Course of Miracles that says, you don't own anything until you give it away. And that just run right up with me.
Mm-hmm.
If you can teach somebody else, you know it. You've got it then.
Okay, yeah, it integrates it.
Yeah.
So part of how the mind works, and we're going to talk, Bob and I are going to talk about video tracking in our consciousness. How the brain works, it creates representations of information. So as we're in a state, and if we've opened up our state to really be alert to the outside, we move out and there's some event that occurs, and we bring that event into our consciousness, and kind of like on the screen of our mind, we make a representation. You can make a representation of this chair. If you're not very visual, you can look at the chair. You can even imagine what the iron or the metal feels like, or what the cloth feels like, and the texture, or how, the distance. And then you could close your eyes and imagine feeling it, and then overlapping to the visual picture. So what we do with references, we bring them in and we represent them to ourselves, and that's our representational modality. And we represent them with visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. You'll see the symbols in the book. And this is the basic NLP language for the see, hear, feel representations I represent. To learn is to represent, and to represent vividly and fully and dramatically and completely, so that the mental screen of my mind fully engages whatever the event is. So a lot of times we just half see, half hear. We don't notice. What was the tone of voice? What was the pitch or the melody? Or what was the color? We move through the world and we don't see, we don't hear, we don't smell, we don't taste, we don't make good representations. How can you, and if you don't encode it vividly, dramatically on the screen of your mind, then it's going to be awful hard to recall it. So one of the first things we want to do in our learning state is to open up our senses and bring information in. And it may be so simple as just a chair. People who say they don't visualize, that's the exercise I always start with. But we can make it simpler. With children, we could say, you know what a pizza looks like? You don't know what a pizza looks like. You can't represent a triangle type of pizza with all kinds of goodies on it. You can't imagine what that smells like. And I know you can't imagine what that tastes like. So you can run your own brain. No, you can't run your own brain. Your pizza looks like an apple. It looks like a green apple, no, a red apple. And of course, you know what you're doing in your own brain. You're making pictures. and maybe smells, maybe tastes, and you're making distinctions. And that's how I like to start with working with children who say that they can't represent, or who think that something's broken in their brain doesn't work, they don't learn. Because this is the basis of learning: represent and visually, auditorily, tracking over from words to representation. So we start there, but you have to have your senses open, and then paying attention. This is where meta-learning comes in, paying attention to the screen of my mind. The screen of your mind, was it in color? Was it bright color, pastel color? What intensity of color did you have? Do you have? What is the size of your screen? Pam, just with your hands, how big is your screen? Little pictures? Bigger picture? Anybody bigger than this? Bryce has got this. Double it. In your mind, just double it.
The screen doubled, but the picture didn't.
You don't want that.
So there may be a frame up there. I'm not letting that pizza get that any bigger than that.
Just back up from the screen.
Okay, let's use celery. Let's go to carrots. So one of the first things we want to do if we want to be ferocious learners is let's use the screen of our mind. Let's make it bigger. A number of years ago, when I was doing my training with Richard Bandler, I decided to make the internal screen of my mind about 20 by 20 feet. So when I represent things, when I'm reading, it's on big screen. Every once in a while, I'll read something so dramatic, I double that. But most of the time, it's just 20 by 20. And so my sense is that once we make it really big, it's more compelling. It's harder to get away from. And you can also make it much more intense. How close is your screen? Who else is about there? Everybody? Here? What if it was here? The next thing is that once it comes so close, a lot of times we step into it. Are you in the picture or out of the picture with the pizza? Or with the apple, or with the celery? Is it just on the screen, or are you in the screen with it?
I was out, and then you suggested. No, I didn't.
So it seems to me the next step is when I read, and this is that application thing, this is that being there and sending all kinds of signals to my neurology. If I want whatever the experience is, if I'm reading about how to type or how to ride a bike, or if I'm reading about how to do math problems, what if I stepped into the screen of my awareness that I'm representing these things and I'm inside it, and it's 3D, and everywhere I look, the screen is there. Instead of it just being a flat little, small little two-dimensional object. It seems to me that's one way that we can really kill our reading strategy, just make it small and tiny and black and white, whereas when we start enlarging it and stepping in at times to experience it from the inside. One of the early NLP books, Richard Bandler was talking about teaching a child, tutoring a child in mathematics. And the child didn't get mathematics, so Richard had him step inside the numbers and move up and down the ones and the twos and the sevens and experience it from the inside. Well, he was a kinesthetic learner. And now he could experience the numbers from the inside. And so that began, because he had a bad relationship with numbers. He hated numbers. Well, this is conceptual. Hating numbers. So once he got inside and played inside of numbers, he had a different attitude about numbers. What would it feel like to slide down a 7? To move through an 8? And so how we represent, the quality of our representation, the largeness of our screen on the inside, these are all factors about representations. What about tones and sounds and noises? And people who are more auditory, a lot of times have all kinds of soundtracks going on. Voices, sounds, music. Do you have music going on in your head when you're studying, learning, experiencing? Anybody got music going on right now? Turn it up so the rest of us can hear. So people who are auditory, sometimes having some nice music in the background. Whether it's soft, relaxing music, or depending upon the subject that we're studying, if it's more intense. What happens if you added a soundtrack to your consciousness so that there is sounds or music or words or phrases going on? One that I added a number of years ago, it goes like this. Mmm. I just hear that from time to time. Mmm. Read something. Mmm. But you can put any kind of sounds, words, phrases, music inside our consciousness, and just like making a visual snapshot of the chair, closing our eyes and seeing it, closing our eyes, re-snapping it until I can see. Same thing auditorily. You can turn on a piece of music, listen to it, turn it off, and now see if you can reproduce it, represent it in your head, turn it on, auditorily snapshot it, and just keep doing that until you can hear it. Or someone's voice, or tone of voice, or expression. So we can stick all kinds of sounds and words and phrases if it's going to assist us in the way we learn. The kinesthetics of learning. What are the kinesthetics? What do you notice in terms of breathing? How do you breathe when you're really into a nice learning state? How high is breathing, or mid-chest breathing, or low stomach breathing? Can you think of a state that would be more focused in terms of learning than a hypnotic state? Because in a hypnotic state, we're just wide open, so suggestible to whatever it is that we're interacting with. So in one sense, the greatest learning state is a hypnotic state. Because we've let down our barriers, we're letting it in, we're just going to play with it, experiment with it, encode it, and we can judge it later, we can clean through it later, filter through what we want, what we don't want, but we're in such a nice, relaxed state. So the state learning there on page 13, what we're looking at is really trying to find and identify our own optimal learning states.
Can I ask a quick application question?
Okay.
I've got an 8-year-old client that I've been working with, and he's having trouble with reading comprehension. So I had him to read to me, which it makes sense, you know. And he sings the words as he reads them. And I asked him, I said, is this what's going on inside your head? He said, yes, it is. When it gets more than one paragraph, he will not read it because it's too long. He can't sing all the way through it. So I guess my question is, what would be a good suggestion in order to get him? Because obviously he needs to quit doing that, or he's not, or the reading comprehension is going to further.
Somehow he's overwhelming himself with looking and thinking that there's all this more to come. So one way that we're controlling our brains in learning, and all of us do that, if a lot of times we overwhelm ourselves by looking at something and getting too much of the big picture, and then it seems so overwhelming. And so the chunking down, the detailing into more specifics, and being able to control our consciousness to zoom in on one piece and then add another piece and add another piece and add another piece. Complexity sometimes is a turnoff to people. Anybody have a semantic reaction to it's complex? Well, complexity is just one simple thing laid upon another simple thing. Most of us know that. We started with making the A, and then we made the B. Well, now we see a word. We hardly ever see letters. We see words. In fact, we may not even see the individual word. We may see, a chunk of words at a time. And that seems so complex. Study a new foreign language. But we have to start down to, if the alphabet is different, if it's Greek or Hebrew or some other Russian or some other kind of Japanese, we have to start at the letter level and build that up until the word level, the phonetics level, morphology level, and so we build it up. And then what later seems real complex, it was easy. It was just one simple thing upon another. So that's one of the ways I negotiate my way through something that's new and different outside my field of awareness. I just say, it's not complex, it's just one simple thing upon another.
I had a student who was making D's in my class, and I got some, and this is an 8th grader in a literature class, and I got a piece of writing that he did, and it was just an incredible piece of writing. This kid is like a steep, he'll write and make major bucks on it. What I did with him was, because he could not read, because he was, how could he put everything in his writing then? What I did was I said, you know what, until you learn how to read other people's writing, You're not going to be able. And so when you brought that up about this 8-year-old, you know, he's not ready to write symphonies yet. He's only writing preludes, and until he can read through the words to the whole score, he can't write it. So he's got to read. And when I sorted this kid, split the sides, one that he could read and one that he could write, his grades improved dramatically.
So this is chunking down. We're going to call it meta-detailing. You've got 4 or 5 pages in your manual on meta-detailing, starting with a large level concept and detailing it down. Comprehension comes from one piece after another piece after another piece, and this is where relaxation assists and facilitates in the learning. If I rush myself, have you ever felt under a time pressure to read something, get something read, and so you're reading through it, and then we're not encoding it well? So there is a facet of slow and thorough to make good representations, clear and vivid and detailed representations, because if I go too fast, the rush, the pressure reduces it. So giving ourselves a chance to slow down and going step by step is going to be part of accelerating our learning. So on this learning state, what we're looking for is really enabling ourselves to get into this state. And at this point, we might find some dragons breathing around in the corners of our minds. And dragon states are those frames of references about our state that may put us at odds with it. So one of the biggest dragons that we experience as adults and that kids experience is fear of making a mistake, fear of being foolish, fear of being stupid. I know none of you probably ever have experienced that one. But most of us have gone through that process. So as you get into that state, think about something that you want to learn, but it's kind of difficult, or it's new, or it's different, or you're just not familiar with that field. And think about, from this most ferocious state, taking that on, and just notice if anything comes up, if anything surfaces, if anything is in the back of the mind, any voice, any feeling, any awareness emerges that as it were sabotages the learning state. So we want to flush out some of the dragons. And so part of learning, part of the definition of learning, is making intelligent mistakes and using them intelligently. So the best learners make at least 3 good mistakes a day. So if you're aware of and welcome and appreciate, what intelligent mistakes can I make today? What foolish, embarrassing blunders can I use today to facilitate my learning? Then, as I'm moving through, playing, trying on, kind of the kindergarten attitude, let me just try and experiment. Because it's the wild and woolly experiments and experimenting that's part of the learning mindset. And if I have a good adjustment and good relationship to failure, to mistakes, to blunders, to looking like a fool, for asking the stupid question. I mean, when you start studying the histories of geniuses, they're the ones who ask the stupid questions. And everybody else says, you shouldn't ask a stupid question. But they asked it, and then they started exploring and inventing and creating things that other people, it was outside their paradigm, they couldn't even get out of their box to even think it's possible. So the best kind of a student is the one who is willing to plant and to express the stupidest questions. So what kind of a relationship do you have to stupid questions?
There aren't any.
There aren't any. That ought to be the way we really think about it.
The ones that go unasked.
The only ones are the ones that go unasked. So adjusting ourselves to make sure that there are no stupid questions, then we can just jump in there and we've got that ferocious attitude of, what's that about? What holds us back is that judgment that I may look foolish, I may look stupid, I may look silly. And so we hold ourselves back from asking those kinds of questions, asking about, well, what's not here? And what else is there? And so we have that ferocious attitude moving forward. And that seems to me to be one of the biggest dragons that we need to do. So I would suggest welcome that one in. Now try that on if If you don't have this well installed that there are no stupid questions, then welcome in. Imagine yourself asking the most stupid question here today and embarrassing yourself. And just welcome that in. And notice what happens. Notice what's in the back of the mind. So that as we give ourselves permission to be ferocious in our learning, I'm going to learn. I'm going to ask these questions.
You have to give up a comfort level.
Give up
If you want to ask those questions.
Yeah.
You know, me, I'm sitting here with all these people, I gotta go back to work with them. I'm like, stupid. Yeah, sometimes am I gonna care? No, but the rest of them, I'm not gonna see them again.
So you can ask them in front of them.
I'll ask them, I don't care. But most people, you know, sitting in this position would say, forget it. You know,
Right.
my comfort level here, I've got to see these people again, unless they
Right.
do it by themselves. You know?
Right.
But then again, they might say, but I don't know these people. There is no comfort with them. So,
Yeah.
you know, you go back and forth between the two.
So here comes the safety question in learning. Most of us need a safe environment, and maybe an interpersonal environment, in which to ask silly questions, to ask the things that everybody else seems to know already. But I flush it out and I just ask it because it's safe. So in terms of teaching and working with people, it seems to me when we make it safe to ask the question, when we set frames and pre-frame things, that there are no stupid questions. In fact, the questions that you ask that I don't have an answer for are the very questions that may enable us to push out to new areas, new discoveries, new explorations. So as we make it safe for other people, as we make it safe for ourselves, so that it's safe for us to ask those questions and to explore those new areas. And sometimes we may have to do whatever adjustments we may make so that we give ourselves that kind of permission, because our learning is that important.
And often those people don't know the answers either.
Yeah?
I find if I give myself permission to really screw up, then that old voice that has said, you shouldn't have done that, look how stupid you look, that just totally disarms it going in. What can it say? You had permission to do.
All right. So everybody give yourself permission to ask the stupidest questions and just make mistakes, because it is out of our mistakes that sometimes we discover wild and wonderful things. And it opens up the mind, it makes us feel safer, and then learning as exploration, as encounter, as experience moves on. When we start thinking about metastates, and we'll do this and take a break here, we start with a state, and we've started with the learning state. You can find out your metastates, the ones that you brought in here this morning, by asking the question, what is the quality of your learning? Now, what we mentioned a little bit earlier, my guess is true for almost every one of you here this morning. You have joyful learning. Learning is joyful. So when we ask the question, what is the quality of your learning, it's like you've also brought some thoughts and feelings that is another state, a state of enjoying and delight and pleasure. And you've brought this state of delight and pleasure to your learning, and after a while, it just becomes one state, as it were. But the learning state is layered with the joy and the pleasure. What else have you layered your learning with? What is the quality of your learning? Is it intense? Is it passionate? Maybe you brought passion to bear. Is it ferocious? Maybe you brought ferocity to bear. Is it focused? Maybe you brought thoughts and feelings in a state of focus and intensity to bear. What have you brought to your learning state that now qualifies the state, and is the property of the state, is the characteristic of the state, is the kind of learner you've become? When we ask this question, what is the quality of your learning, we can find out some of the old metastates that we've applied to it, and a lot of times someone else metastated it to us. I know this is a lot of work. I know this is going to be really hard. and they give us these states, and we say, okay. And so we just bring them in and layer. And so sometimes these are the things we have to toss off, and sometimes stubbornly refuse to allow it to mean that. Just like we may stubbornly refuse to allow a mistake to have anything to do with who we are. I am more than my mistakes. I am more my behavior.
Kind of listening to what Jim said, I think that it was kind of an epiphany here. I think it's kind of why I went into teaching, because everybody's learning so hard, and I thought that's not I'm gonna get away with doing something. I'm not really working.
So that's
You
part of
think
the...
I'm working? I'm not working.
So the opposite of work is play.
Yeah.
How many have layered play upon your learning so that the quality of your learning is kind of like play?
I'm winning the game.
So maybe a game, bringing thoughts and feelings of this is a game. This is a game. This is play. I would really suggest play and game being two meta states to bring to bear upon your learning. That when we bring it, that this is play. Who do I get to play with today? Get to play with Aristotle today. Get to play with Einstein today. This is play. This is discovery. This is exploration. Here's another facet of learning. Not only mistakes may be a dragon state, but getting stuck. So we've got to also explore our relationship with, I feel stuck. I don't know where to go to the next place to open up mind, consciousness, awareness, skill. And so how do you respond when you feel stuck? Now this is the meta-stating question. Where does your brain go? What thoughts and feelings do you layer upon this feeling of being stuck? And if what you bring to bear to it now locks it down, locks it in, then it just makes things worse. But if you bring thoughts and feelings of, and I would recommend, first of all, appreciation. I appreciate my stuckness. I accept my stuckness. Let me honor the message of this feeling stuck. Let me explore the stuckness. And it seems to me that those are some of the things that when we set those frames, then the stuckness has a different texture to it. Same thing with confusion. Confusion means you've got so much information and you don't know how to order it. It's very different from ignorance. Ignorance is kind of the blank screen. You don't know anything about it. So you can't get confused. It takes a lot of knowledge to get confused. Which is why when you order all the confusion, then you have new ways to construct all kinds of new realities. So confusion is the gateway to new learnings, unless you think it means you're stupid. So it all depends upon what thoughts and feelings you bring to this experience of confusion. Once again, welcoming it, accepting it, appreciating it, honoring it. Do you honor your confusion? Do you honor your stuckness? Do you honor the sense of making a mistake? When we do that, then it has a different texture than when we judge it, criticize it, harsh with it, insulting with it, name-calling with it, personalizing it. So these are questions that have to do with when you're in this state, whether it's stuck or confused or making a mistake or whatever, what thoughts and feelings do you embrace it with? And those higher level thoughts that layer on top of it is now going to texture it. And it's going to have a new quality. Hateful stuckness. Angry stuckness. Rejecting stuckness. Well, that'll just make it worse. And it's paradoxical.
Can it fuel you though? That hate, I'm not going to stay here, I'm not going to be stuck.
If that's the meaning that you give to it, and if it works for you. If it is a propulsion away from that, so that it drives you to more people, more books, more information. So if it works, but it would only be to propel you out of there, because as soon as you get out of there, then you have to drop all that judgment so that you can pull in new information.
For me, it'll fuel me, and then I can do the appreciating afterwards.
Okay.
So how do you
Okay.
how do you appreciate it at the moment instead of making it fuel you and just bringing out all those bad feelings? How can you stop, appreciate it, and then move on?
My sense is, and we say this in meta-states a lot, that when we have a primary state and consciousness is out here focusing on whatever it is in the external world, when I bring negative thoughts and feelings back onto myself, the negative feelings are useful when it's out here. I'm angry at this or that. I'm afraid of this or that. I'm sad about this or that. I'm disgusted with this or that. When the negative feeling is toward out here, then it's information about my map of the world and my experience of the world. When I bring negative thoughts and feelings against myself, it puts me at odds with my own self. And essentially the emotions have very little place to go. There are exceptions. But for the most part, it just puts me at odds with my own self, so that when I accept that, oh, I'm in the state of being stuck. That's all that is. It says nothing about me, it says nothing about the future, it says nothing about capacity. I refuse to let it mean those things. I accept the fact I'm stuck. Now, in what way am I stuck? To what extent am I stuck? How am I stuck? What would be the first step to stretch the boundaries a little bit more to get unstuck? Is this a time to take a break? So there's all kinds of stuckness. There's stuckness of, I'm under so much time pressure and everything, my mind is really closing in on something, I need to take a break. I need to sleep on this. I need to go get another perspective. So there's all kinds of stuckness. And when I accept the stuckness and then appreciate it, maybe this is a signal to take a break. Maybe this is a signal to go get some information from somebody else. It seems to me that then I'm dealing with myself in a kinder, gentler way, so that as I manage consciousness with the layering here, that it allows me just to move on in a way that's going to be appropriate.
I guess I'm one of those metaphorical thinkers, because what came into my mind as y'all were talking was, my question is, what am I stuck in? Am I stuck in molasses and I'll eventually eat my way out of it? Or am I stuck in tar? Like you said, I need somebody to go get the gasoline, help clean it off, and that kind of thing. You know, if I can picture in my mind that I'm stuck in molasses and I'll eat my way out of it, I'm okay.
Good stuckness.
Yeah. You can tell I was raised in rural Georgia.
So there are different kinds of stuckness, and welcoming it so that we can explore that state. It's just a state of mind and emotion, and it makes sense. There is structure to it, and so if we accept it and explore it and appreciate it, then we can find out how is this useful. In fact, bringing that thought to bear upon it, how is this useful, then allows us to utilize our states in a much useful, more appropriate way than to get into a conflict with our state. I hate it when I go in that state. The worst people who have anger problems are not the aggressives who are always out there, blowing off steam to everybody. They're the passives who hate their anger. Then they shame themselves. I'm so ashamed of my anger. I'm so ashamed of hating my anger. And then they get the little counseling. They learn better. And then they're embarrassed about their shame of their anger at their fear of their anger. And it's just this loop. And so they just stuff until they can't take it anymore. And the explosion. When we start metastating our learning states, and gives a diagram here of the things that we bring to bear. And with this, I want to introduce three different phrases. One is just a primary state, like a state of learning, openness, receptivity. And that's where we start when we start with learning. We start with the learning state. When I bring joy to it, now I've got a layered state, joyful learning. Joyful learning, pleasant learning, playful learning, exploratory learning, open learning, receptive learning, whatever I bring to bear. Sometimes this on that will create a gestalt. That is, something more than the sum of these parts will emerge. And we're going to call that a gestalt state. Because a new configuration of consciousness arises. And it's more than the sum of the parts. So with the Gestalt of Courage, in courage there's fear, apprehension, anxiety. Then we bring passion, great vision, self-confidence. We bring something, and when we bring that to the fear gets tempered in such a way that out of it arises the Gestalt of Courage. And if you pull courage apart and look at fear and passion, you wonder, how does courage come out of that mix? Well, it's more than the sum of the parts. It's a Gestalt state. So that we have primary states, we have meta states, we have Gestalt states. And to gestalt our own states so that we create new configurations that's so much more than the sum of the parts, we now can do some design engineering, and that's what's on page 52.